Hello! So I thought it'd be fun to try and recreate the Human League's biggest hit, Don't You Want Me, using as many of the original instruments and techniques as possible. Let's go! So first, some detective work. What did the Human League use to create Don't You Want Me? Well, conveniently, in the album sleeve for Dare, they list the equipment that was used on the album. Now, whilst this was what was used to create the album as a whole, and we want to know what was used specifically on Don't You Want Me, it does at least narrow it right down to a short list right off the bat, which is rather handy. Next, I read a bunch of interviews with the late great producer Martin Rushent, engineer Dave Allen, as well as band members Phil Oakey and Joe Callis. And finally, I used my own experience of using all of the gear that's on this list to do a bit of a process of elimination, and this is what I think was used on Don't You Want Me. The Lin LM1 on drums, the Roland System 700 and Roland MC8 on the sequenced parts, and for the hand-played parts, the Roland Jupiter 4 and the Korg Delta. Plus, there's something else, which I'll save as a surprise. So in this interview, producer Martin Rushent explains that they would start by making a lead sheet working out the tempo and the number of bars and any time signature changes, and then they would tap that into the MC8 and record a sync pulse with the right number of bars on one of the tracks of the tape machine, which they could then send back and sync up all the overdubs. So I've recorded the sync pulse from the MC8. We can send it back to the MC8 and do each overdub and it will lock in time with it. It works really well. So I've worked out the bass line. I had to convert it into the MC8 paradigm of CV note numbers, step times, gate times based around a time base of pulses per quarter note. Here's the Excel spreadsheet I made whilst working that out. I then had to tap all that data into this. From start to finish took 6 hours. This is excruciating by today's standards, but for 1977, it was absolutely revolutionary. So the bass sound, I believe, is a composite of 3 different sounds. So the first one is this. Recognize it? So I think this is 2 oscillators, quite narrow pulse waves into a low-pass filter with an envelope, and then a VCA with an envelope, and that's basically it. Very simple. And it's not like a mega fat bass sound like we would do today. It's quite a nasally sound. I think it's supposed to kind of sound like a bass guitar a bit, or it was inspired by a bass guitar, because it's more that kind of sound than it is a whopping sub-bass like we do today. The next bass sound that you hear for the majority of the song is a much tighter sound. So I've closed down the filter, tightened up the envelopes, particularly the decay. It sounds like this. And again, it's quite a nasally sound. You can play around with the settings, make it softer. But it has got a bit of bite. It's not that tight. Kind of that sound, really. And in the context of everything else, it really works. The final part of the bass line is, I think, played by hand. It's the little bits that go dum-dum, ba-dum, ba-dum, da-da-dum, bum, ba-dum, ba-dum, ba-da-bum, bum. Those little fill-ins are a different sound. I don't know why they did that as an overdub or whether it was an afterthought or what, but I'm going to compile those into one of the sequences rather than play them all in by hand. And then I'll put the bass line together. Okay, I'm going to hand over to Benj to do the drums on the Lin LM1 in a moment, but before we do that, I need to explain a technical problem that I encountered, and the reason I'm bothering to do that is because they encountered the same technical problems, so it's relevant to the original recording. So, I sent Benj the sync signal from my MC8, he put it into his Lin LM1, and this came out. Now, whilst it would be fun to do a speed metal remix, that tempo was a wee bit fast. And it wasn't like it was twice as fast or 4 times as fast. It bore no relation to the original tempo at all. So I had a look at the sync signal from the MC8, and it's 11 low pulses, 7 high pulses, 216 pulses per quarter note, which is no doubt unique to this machine. And then it dawned on me how naive I'd been. This was cutting-edge technology invented in collaboration between Ralph Dyke in Canada, and some very clever people at Roland in Osaka, Japan in 1977. The Linn LM1 was also groundbreaking technology invented by Roger Linn in a garage in California in 1979. So there were no precedents or ways to do this. Of course, you couldn't just connect the two of them and hit play and it would just happen to work. And then I found an interview with the engineer from Dare, Dave Allen, who talks about how he had to come up with a sync signal to make the two things talk to one another, which is what I've got to do. So what I did was program a pulse train. So you can either use the gates or the multiplexes, which are programmable gates, and you just need to program the right number of them per quarter note. And then you need to run them into the gate delay on the System 700 to do pulse shaping. Now, I don't have the wing cabs, which is where the gate delay is, but weirdly, I have a one-of-a-kind prototype for the System 100M that has the System 700 gate delay in it. So I played around with that and got a pulse signal running that was the right number of pulses per quarter note and the right type of signal, sent it to Benj, and hallelujah, it worked. So at the time, you could just about buy a digital sequencer and you could just about buy a digital drum machine. But if you wanted to use them at the same time, you had to invent the way to make them talk to one another. Right, Benj, over to you, mate.
The Linn drum computer is so easy to use that even a drummer can use it. All you do is bang on these with these. To record, all you do is press record and then bang on these. To make a song arrangement, you can create up to 100 patterns and then chain them together with this section.
If you're not subscribed to Benj's Meme Tune channel, oh my goodness, are you in for a treat. Hands down, the best vintage synth content on the internet. He even films it on vintage video equipment, which is a level of insanity I can only aspire to. Now, an interesting thing about the Linn LM1 is that Roger Linn didn't edit the samples tightly like we would today. So they're a little bit loose and behind the beat, which gives the LM1 a distinctive feel. So here's the isolated drums and System 700 bass line playing together. Okay, in that intro section, and when the intro section repeats again later in the song, there's another part. So same riff, but just with a different patch. So you've got 3 oscillators, all sawtooth waves, one at 8 feet, one at the octave at 16 feet, and one at the octave at 16 feet, but then tuned up a perfect fifth. Those run into a low-pass filter, into an amp and out, and you've got 2 envelope generators, one for the filter, one for the amp, then a little bit of LFO for vibrato of the oscillators. And it's kind of got the effect of someone playing power chords on a guitar. It's got a kind of slightly fizzy sound, but also the perfect fifths. And the octave, it's very much like power chords. So yeah, there's another part. So another sequence part is a 16th note rhythm that runs throughout. I'm sure you recognise that. So we've got one oscillator, a pulse wave into a filter, into a phase shifter, out into an amp. Very tight envelopes. And then you can play with the phase shift. somewhere maybe there. And then in the verses, there's this extra oscillator that comes in. Like that, a sixth above the other. That might have been sequenced with the CV, but because it's the same interval the whole time, I cheated. And then you can play around and manipulate the phase shift. And because this part is so repetitive, and you can make use of the copy function on the MC8, this only took me 10 minutes to sequence the whole song. And it makes me wonder how many parts they deliberately made easier so that they could copy, because it must have been such a pain trying to sequence everything. But yeah. There's that other part. So for the next sound, we need to use another instrument, as I alluded to earlier, and that instrument is a guitar. What? There was famously no guitar on the Human League's Dare album? Actually, there was. So in this interview with Joe Callis, he reveals that one of his personal victories whilst recording this song was persuading everybody to let him trigger a sound from the System 700 with his guitar. So what I think he means by that is that he used the Interface 1 or 714A module. There's monophonic pitch to CV, it's got an envelope follower, and it can generate gates from an external signal. So you then hook that back up with the synth, and you can play it rhythmically. Great, but how do you get it to play the notes you want rather than one continuous droning note like you just heard? Well, then you go back to the MC8, you program in the note numbers, which it converts to CVs, where they're supposed to be within a bar, and then as it's running along, the CVs are changing, the pitches are changing, and you're just triggering the synth rhythmically. Sounds like this. Now, a little nerdy detail. P. Hicks, who has helped me tremendously with this video and who has done a cover of Don't You Want Me Before, noticed, and I also noticed, that in chorus 1 and chorus 2, the chord change in this part is 3 semiquavers ahead of the beat, where you'd expect it, but then in the last 2 choruses, it's on the beat where you think it should be. And we were wondering whether that was deliberate, whether they wanted it to kind of push in and have a kind of more urgent feel to it, a more energetic feel, or whether someone mucked up with the timing and they either didn't have time to change it, or whether they thought, do you know what, that sounds kind of cool, and went with it. And my suspicion is furthered because when you listen to it in the final choruses where it's where you'd expect it to be, there's a chord and then there's a change on the last semiquaver of the first beat. And if you nudge it back by 3 semiquavers, you wind up with the way it is in the first and second choruses. So it seems like an error that they went with. If you're in the Human League, let us know. So at this point, I need to say a massive thank you to P. Hicks, who dusted off his MC8 to take some of the sequencing load away from me, saving me hours, if not days of my time. He sent me the data files through, which I've loaded in, and they work. So here's one of the parts he sequenced. So you hear this in the verses, but also in the very last chorus as well. And it's stacked up in octaves. I can't do that because I don't have the full System 700 where the wing cabs that give you 9 oscillators, I've only got 3, so I'll have to do it as 2 recordings in 2 octaves. Plus, on the original, it's got tons of reverb on it, which adds a whole other level to it. In fact, I haven't talked about effects or processing. That's, a whole other thing as well. And just to give it that context, here is the part layered up with a reverb on it. What this gives you with the raw sound is this energy through the syncopation. It's so groovy and it's so effective. Okay, for my next trick, also sequenced by P. Hicks, thank you P. On the MC8, it's the gate channels that are fixed. The CVs and the multiplexes can be assigned pretty much as you please. So what you can do is sequence 3 CVs, send them to 3 oscillators, assign them to the same gate channel, and get some paraphonic chords. Of course, that gives you a really, really tight sound that it would be very hard to do unless you were a very good player. Okay, so another yawn-inducing tedious point is that in the bridge pre-chorus section, the Jupiter 4 is playing some chords. A major, B minor, A minoris, E majoris. And the System 700 is sequenced to follow those chords with a kind of rhythmic version of them, voiced like this. A major, B minor, flat 5, or an implied B half diminished. So that is a programming whoopsie doodle. So you get the B minor in the Jupiter 4, you get the B minor flat 5 in the System 700, and the total chord is... So if you've ever tried to work out this song and thought, what is that chord? It's a mistake is what it is. But in the context of where it happens, we're in the pre-chorus, we're building to the chorus, crescendo, tension, release of the chorus. And what helps build tension better than dissonance releasing to consonance? So the last of the sequenced parts, or what I think is the last of the sequenced parts. So you hear this in the choruses of the song. And now that I've sequenced all the parts of what I think are all the sequenced parts, what's interesting about them is none of them are complicated or have any complex modulation. None of them use filter resonance at all. And they're all quite narrow, pulse wave, fizzy, fuzzy, phasey kinds of sounds. And you wouldn't reach for these kinds of sounds nowadays if you were sat in front of a System 700. And yet, in the context of the song, works brilliantly. So maybe there's a lesson in there for us. Right, in the intro and the choruses of the song, there is a polyphonic string synthesizer part, and there's only one instrument in their gear list, which is a polyphonic string synthesizer, which is the delta. So I'm almost certain that's what we're listening to. You'll notice this is not a delta. It is a trident, which was made by Korg 1 year after the delta, and is basically a more fancy schmancy version of the delta, and it's got the string synthesizer section in it. So we've got the intro. So just triads outlining those chords, which give a nice pad and bed that works against the kind of rhythmic bass line that's happening in that intro. Really simple sound. You can combine 3 octaves on the trident, but on the delta you can mix between 2, I think, but I think it's only 1 anyway. And then I've got no attack time, a little bit of release. I've slightly touched the EQ to brighten it. I've not touched the filter, and that's about it. It sounds like it sounds. And then in the chorus you get this. Little diads, very simple part, but you would notice it if it wasn't there. Okay, there's another polyphonic synthesizer in play, and I'm pretty certain it's the Roland Jupiter 4. And here is Benj recreating the part for the verses. You can hear it's just a really simple, straight down the middle sound, as with everything on this song, but it totally works. And then there's a tighter version of this sound that you hear in the choruses. So everything is recorded, you're going to hear the result in a moment. Before that, I just wanted to say that this has been one of my most favourite videos to do. It's been excruciating to do it the way that they did it, and it took a lot of willpower not to cheat and use computers and modern workarounds to save hours. And I'm so glad that we stuck at it and did it right, because to take something that's so wonderful and so familiar and rip it down to nothing and then rebuild it is such an amazing experience. You just learn so much. I've got newfound appreciation for the songwriting, the arranging, the performances, the production, and the engineering. So really glad that we did it. A massive thank you to the people who've made this video possible. P. Hicks, Benj, and Mishkin Fitzgerald, who you'll hear sing in a moment. But also to my patrons on Patreon. I couldn't even begin to justify taking on a project as daft as this. If I didn't have support, it just would not be viable. So you guys make all the difference. Thank you. So everything's done. Let's sit back and listen to the remake of Don't You Want Me. Cheers.
I can't believe it when I hear that you won't